Here's a hot topic. Iterators in Go 1.23. The most controversial language change since they decided to add generics back in version 1.18. Let's talk about how the new proposal looks like in a second, but first things first, what even are iterators? So, in the dumbest possible terms, iterators are basically a way to loop over something while that something is still in the process of being created. A simple example without an iterator would be returning a list, or in Go terms a slice, from a function like this. This function creates a slice and then it returns it as its output, and then we can loop over it with a for range loop like this. So what's happening here is that we wait for the produce function to create the whole slice, and only then do we begin the for loop. So an iterator would allow this loop to run while the producer is still producing the results. Now, there's already a way to achieve this in Go. Actually, there are several ways which are all kind of similar but not exactly the same. Probably the most used iterator currently in Go is in the database/SQL package, and it looks something like this. You might be used to seeing it a bit differently since I omitted error handling to make things a bit easier to understand. But basically, the query we execute returns a value called rows, and this value is basically an iterator. So we execute this for loop until the next method on rows returns true. And under the hood, this next function call basically prepares the next value, which we then access by calling the scan method. Now, some of you might be familiar with other languages like Python or Rust, which have iterators already built in. And here, for example, are two ways of implementing an iterator in Python. So like this, by implementing two special methods on a class, or like this, by using the yield keyword. This second approach actually creates a generator, which is a special kind of iterator in Python, but that's irrelevant for our discussion. Okay, now that we know what iterators are, let's look at how Go 1.23 plans on implementing them. Here's the wiki article that talks about the iterators. If we scroll down a bit, we have two types of iterators, one for returning one variable and one for returning two, and these two can then be used like this in for range loops. Now, if we scroll down even more, we can see that the article also provides an example implementation of a basic iterator which traverses the slice backwards. So, by the way, here is the first place I noticed a few complaints about the new iterators. I saw some discontent about iterators being too complicated, because essentially they are a function which returns a function which takes another function as input. To be honest, I find the implementation pretty straightforward, although I should point out that I'm not 100% aware about why they made certain design choices. Anyways, this is how the iterator can then be used. Like, we create a slice and then we pass it to the previously created iterator function, and then we can hopefully traverse it from back to front. The article also points out that this example basically translates into something like this, which, by the way, is already doable in Go 1.22. Iterators also come with their own library, which is called Iter or Xiter for the time being. This package defines utilities to work with iterators. So, for example, a function that drains the iterator, a function that collects all the results in the iterator, or a function that checks if the iterator contains a value. And now we are ready to see where most of the drama comes from. The iterators, among other things, allow for implementation of more functional style constructs, such as, for example, map, filter, or take. For example, like this package I found here. For a reason that is honestly unknown to me, this kind of packages will somehow ruin the language. In all seriousness, though, I'm curious to see what iterators will bring to the language. I'm very happy to finally see a standard way of iterating in Go, but we'll see what these changes will bring in the long run. As for the worries about making the language cluttered, I can see why some people think that a lot of hidden flows makes the language cluttered, less reliable, and also harder to understand. But then again, on the other hand, I've also seen that functional languages, even though they are higher level, are a lot of times very readable and I would say even easier to understand than a language like Go. So we'll see. I have a feeling that iterators will be a lot like generics were a few years back. Can you write ugly code with them? Yes. Did I ever do dumb stuff with them? Hell yes. But do they make the language worse? I don't think they do. I think they have a place in Go and they do make some things way nicer. At the end of the day, I don't see why a language feature, or the lack of it, could really force people not to write bad code. I mean, sure, it's probably a bit easier to decipher ugly Go code than, say, ugly C++, but oh boy, have I seen some wonderful implementations in Go. Believe it or not, I've seen business code written with reflect or giant 15-level deep for loops. If you want that statement in cynical terms, blame the developer, not the language. Anyways, I also like that the language is evolving, and even if in the months after the release of 1.23 I end up hating iterators, I'm still excited to learn which problems they might help to solve. Also, please let me know what you think. If you like the video, please consider doing the usual subscribe/like chores. Thanks for watching and cheers!